In a place where the waters seem calm and serene, there lies a secret as deep as the lake itself. Every 30 years, something awakens in the depths, something that should not be disturbed. Today, we will follow Rachel and her team as they unravel a mystery that goes beyond reason, discovering that some things are better left forgotten. What lurks in the shadows of this lake? Prepare to be immersed in a story of mystery, fear, and the unknown. The small town of Lakeshore, nestled in the heart of the United States, was known for its tranquility and stunning scenery. Its quiet streets and the sparkling waters of Eternal Lake were a haven for tourists and locals alike. But behind the serene beauty was something that the old residents knew all too well, a legend that stretched back generations. Every 30 years, the lake seemed to take on a life of its own. Mysterious disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and the sudden silence of the surrounding nature always marked this cycle. And the city, which lived in the shadow of this secret, knew that time was approaching again. A group of researchers, intrigued by the stories circulating among the oldest residents, decided to investigate. Rachel, a young scientist who had recently arrived in town, led the group. She didn't believe in legends, but something about the details of the stories and the behavior of the locals made her uneasy. The last recorded disappearance had been exactly 30 years ago, and a new cycle was about to begin. Rachel was determined to understand what was happening in that lake, even if it meant venturing beyond the limits of what was rational. Rachel was not alone in her quest. By her side were Ethan, a photographer obsessed with unexplained phenomena, and Sarah, a local history student who, unlike Rachel, believed deeply in the legends of the lake. Since she was a little girl, Sarah had heard her grandfather talk about the things that live in the deep, and now, she had the chance to discover the truth for herself. In the weeks leading up to the 30th anniversary of the last disappearance, the town began to change. The lake's once crystal-clear waters began to take on a greenish hue, and the animals that once roamed the shores simply disappeared. The birds that once filled the surrounding trees with their songs fell completely silent. Rachel and her team camped near the lake, hoping to document any strange phenomena. They were equipped with cameras, sensors, and instruments that could detect changes in the water and air. At first, everything seemed calm, but as the nights wore on, strange sounds began to echo across the lake. It was like a murmur coming from deep within. Ethan, who always had a camera in hand, tried to capture the sounds, but he couldn't find an explanation. "It sounds like a voice, but it's not human," he said, as he adjusted his equipment in an attempt to decipher that distant echo. One particularly cold night, as fog covered the surface of the lake, Rachel, Ethan, and Sarah heard a different sound. It wasn't the low murmur they had heard before, but a deep, almost crying wail coming from deep beneath the water. The three of them looked at each other, tense, as the sound grew louder, seeming to vibrate the air around them. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice a whisper. Ethan, his camera already trained on the lake, gave a silent nod, confirming that everyone had heard. Rachel, ever the skeptic, tried to remain calm. There must be a rational explanation. Maybe underwater currents or a cave generating this sound. But deep down, even she was beginning to doubt her own theories. At dawn, they decided to test the water. Rachel collected samples from the lake, hoping that science could explain what human ears could not. But as she analyzed the material, she was perplexed. The molecules in the water seemed unstable, as if something beyond comprehension was at play. Meanwhile, Sarah insisted that there was something more, something they couldn't see. "The lake is trying to tell us something. The cycle is repeating itself, and we have to figure out what happened 30 years ago to understand what's about to happen." During her investigation, Sarah found an old local newspaper with a yellowed headline, "Mysterious Disappearance. Fisherman vanishes without a trace in Eternal Lake." She knew this was just the beginning. Every 30 years, someone would disappear and the town would go silent about what had happened. But why? Determined to find answers, the trio decided to venture into the depths of the lake on a nighttime expedition, equipped with diving suits and high-powered flashlights. Rachel knew she might be risking more than her scientific career, but curiosity and the fear of not knowing driven her. That night, the fog was thicker than ever, and the surface of the lake reflected the full moon in an unsettling way, as if something dark and alive lurked just beneath its surface. Outfitted in their wetsuits, Rachel, Ethan, and Sarah prepared to enter the water. The temperature was cooler than usual, a chill that seemed to come from the very heart of the lake, seeping through their skin and making them shiver. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice revealing a hesitation it hadn't shown before. "We have no choice," Rachel replied, staring at the dark water in front of her. "If there's something there, it's now or never. We can't expect it to happen again in another 30 years. Sarah, on the other hand, was strangely calm. She held an amulet that had belonged to her grandfather, a gift he had given her as a child. "This will protect us," she told herself, almost like a silent prayer. They dove into the icy waters, their flashlights cutting through the darkness beneath. Visibility was minimal, but they could soon see what lay beneath the surface. Ancient ruins, submerged and covered in algae and moss. Stone columns, carved with symbols no one could understand, rose like the remains of a lost civilization. Something very ancient was there, buried at the bottom of the lake. As they advanced, the sound they had heard earlier, that deep wail, grew louder, reverberating off the underwater walls and their own bodies. It seemed to come from a specific spot, a cave-like opening, just ahead. The hesitation between them grew, but it was too late to turn back. Rachel, her heart racing, led the group toward the cave entrance. "We must go all the way," she thought. But deep down, a part of her knew she was crossing a dangerous line. Inside the underwater cave, the stone walls seemed alive, pulsing with a blue-green light that emanated from crystals embedded in the rocks. Something about the place was otherworldly, as if it were outside of time and space. Suddenly, Sarah stopped. She was frozen, her eyes wide and fixed on something ahead. "Look," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. Ethan and Rachel turned their gazes to the same spot and saw what had terrified them. At the back of the cave, there was a figure, or at least something that looked like a human figure, floating as if suspended in time. It was the missing fisherman, or at least what was left of him. His body was trapped between the rocks, but his expression was one of despair, as if he were screaming, even though he was not making any sound. The shock of the discovery paralyzed the group for a few seconds. Rachel, always skeptical, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She approached cautiously, shining her light on the body trapped between the rocks. The fisherman seemed frozen in time, as if he had been there for decades, but his skin was still intact, his empty eyes fixed on something beyond. Ethan, trembling, muttered, "That's not possible. He should be." His voice trailed off. The man's presence, trapped in such a mysterious way, seemed to defy any rational explanation. Sarah, gripping the amulet tighter, took a step forward. "This lake isn't just a place, it's a prison. It traps not only people, but time as well." Her tone was somber, almost as if she'd already known the answer before she'd arrived. Suddenly, the cave began to shake. The blue-green light from the crystals pulsed more intensely, and the wail that had previously seemed distant was now deafening. Something was about to happen. The lake was reacting to their presence. Rachel, now unsure of what to do, backed away. "We need to get out of here now," she screamed, but her words were drowned out by the sound of the water around her. Panic gripped the group. They tried to swim back, but the currents of water began to pull them toward the bottom of the cave. The stone walls seemed to close in around them, as if the lake itself was determined to keep them trapped there. It was as if the sunken city and the secrets of the lake were alive, refusing to let anyone leave with the knowledge of what they had discovered. Ethan was the first to fight the current, using all his strength to swim toward the surface. Rachel and Sarah followed closely behind, but the feeling that something was watching them, something ancient and powerful, never left them. The deep lament accompanied them, as if it were inside their own heads. When they finally emerged to the surface, the moon still illuminated the lake. The silence, however, was deafening. Everything around them seemed unchanged, but they knew that what they had seen in the depths was real. They had touched something that should have remained forgotten. Back on the shore, panting and exhausted, the trio looked at each other in silence. None of them knew how to explain what they had just experienced. The waters of the lake were calm, but the air around them still carried the feeling that something was wrong. "We can't tell anyone about this," Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. "They wouldn't believe us, and besides, I don't think the lake wants to be discovered. It wants to stay hidden." Sarah nodded, clutching the amulet so tightly that her hands began to ache. "If we tell, we risk drawing more people here. And who knows what the lake will do if it tries to protect itself again." Ethan, still in shock, simply nodded. His hands shook as he put away his cameras, unsure if the footage had captured what they had seen. But he had a feeling that even if it had, the footage would be unrecognizable, distorted by the mysterious force of the lake. The story would spread somehow, but not from the mouths of these three. They left Lakeshore the next day, each carrying with them a secret that would never be revealed. The eternal lake returned to its stillness, but they all knew that in another 30 years it would call for someone again. And so the legend of the eternal lake would continue, shrouded in mystery, feared by the locals and shunned by the curious. Only those brave, or foolish, enough would dare to challenge its secrets. And in the heart of that lake, the ruins and echoes of the past continued to wait for their next victim. The next morning, as the trio packed their things to leave, Sarah noticed something strange. The amulet she carried, which had once glowed with a soft light, was now off. She held it, trying to figure out what it meant, but an unsettling feeling came over her. Something wasn't right. Rachel, busy with her notes, barely noticed when Sarah walked away from the cabin to take one last look at the lake. But Ethan, ever observant, followed his friend from a distance. He watched her approach the shore, the water still reflecting the cold glow of morning. Sarah stared at the lake with an expression of deep confusion. "What is it?" Ethan asked, approaching cautiously. "I feel like something is still calling me," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the calm surface of the lake. Suddenly, the silence was broken. The water began to move, forming small ripples that quickly grew in intensity. It was as if something was emerging from the depths. Ethan, sensing danger, tried to pull Sarah away, but it was too late. The shadow of a figure appeared in the waters, not as a reflection, but as something real, trying to break through the barrier between the lake and the surface. The fisherman they had seen in the depths was now there, his expression of despair still etched on his face, as if he were trying to warn them of something terrible. "Go away now," the figure said, its voice an icy whisper. "He is awake." Before Sarah and Ethan could react, the lake erupted into a whirlpool, and an invisible force pushed them backward. They fell to the ground, gasping for breath, and when they stood up, the lake was calm again. But the feeling that something had changed, something deep and dangerous, remained. When Sarah and Ethan hurried back to the cabin, Rachel was standing there, staring at her laptop screen. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, still panting. Rachel, her hands shaking, adjusted her laptop on the table in the makeshift cabin they were using as a base. The cold glow of the screen reflected in her eyes as she stared at the video from the night before. The images were disturbing. "I just reviewed the footage from last night, and there's something we didn't see," she murmured, her voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and fear. The words, though quiet, echoed in the room, immediately drawing Sarah and Ethan's attention. The two of them moved closer, trying to decipher what Rachel had found. The video showed them diving into the dark, dense waters of the eternal lake. Everything seemed normal at first, with the beams of light from their flashlights cutting through the submerged darkness. But then, as the video continued, something disturbing began to emerge. "Look," Rachel whispered, pausing the video at a specific point. The screen froze, and there, in the shadows in the distance, a figure could be seen. It was not clear, but its silhouette was unmistakable. Something, or someone, had been watching them the entire time. It was as if the figure was moving with them, a silent presence, watching their steps in the depths. Its hazy form blended into the darkness, but it was impossible to miss the intensity with which it seemed focused on the group. "This can't be real," Sarah said, her face going pale. She clutched the amulet she had always carried, as if she could feel the suffocating presence of the lake again as she watched the recording. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the figure. Was that there the whole time? He asked, but he already knew the answer. The thought was terrifying. Something had been following them the entire dive, but they had never noticed. What is that? He asked, more to himself than to the others, shock filling his expression. Rachel once again advanced the video frame by frame. As the image got closer to the figure, it became clearer. This was no mere shadow. There were eyes, two bright dots that seemed to stare directly into the camera, fixed on them. It seemed aware, almost as if it were waiting for them to notice its presence, as if it knew that sooner or later they would notice it. It was watching us, all along, Rachel whispered. A chill ran through the group. It wasn't just what they had discovered in the depths that haunted them. It was the fact that, even without realizing it, they had never been alone. Something was watching them, something that belonged in the lake. And now, it knew that they were aware of its existence, too. Sarah, clutching the amulet tighter, felt a mixture of dread and resignation. This was never just about us finding the lake, she said, her voice shaking. It was watching us, waiting. The air inside the cabin felt heavier, as if the walls were closing in around them. The revelation that an entity was following them, invisible to the naked eye but registered deep within the lake, brought a new layer of fear. The lake had been watching them, and now, more than ever, they knew they were involved in something much larger, something that might be far beyond their comprehension. But the most disturbing thing was that as the video progressed, the figure got closer and closer, becoming clearer and clearer. And then, in the last few seconds of the recording, the creature's eyes flashed on the screen, followed by a single distorted sound that seemed to say, "I'll be back soon." The trio remained silent, staring at each other, unsure how to process what they had just experienced. The atmosphere around them felt heavier, as if the very air itself was carrying the burden of revelation. The weight of something ancient and unfathomable had been awakened, and they could feel it deep within their souls. The feeling of having escaped the lake brought little comfort. They knew deep down that they had not won, only survived, for now. Rachel, usually the most skeptical and logical of the group, felt the crushing weight of uncertainty. She, who always sought rational explanations, could not find words to define what they had just witnessed. That figure in the depths, the missing fisherman, the lament that had accompanied them. Everything pointed to a greater and much more frightening truth. The mystery was not over. In fact, they had only scratched the surface. It's not over yet, is it? Sarah murmured, holding the amulet that now felt colder in her hands. She knew the cycle was far from broken. Something deeper, more evil, would continue to move in the shadows of the lake, waiting for the right moment to return. Every 30 years, the force behind this place would claim another victim, and nothing seemed capable of stopping this cycle. Ethan, usually the most optimistic of the group, looked out over the distant horizon, where the lake now looked peaceful in the glow of the rising sun. But he knew it was a deceptive calm. Those waters, as serene as they seemed, held a dark secret that pulsed just beneath the surface. "He won't stop," Ethan said, his voice somber. "We woke him up, and now he's going to keep going." As they drove away from Lakeshore, the town seemed to return to its usual state. But the trio knew that nothing would ever be the same again. They were leaving behind the lake, but also a part of themselves. What they had awakened was not just a mystery. It was an entity, an ancient force that was now aware of them. As the calm waters reflected the sky, it felt as if the lake was patiently waiting for its next call. And one certainty haunted them. Whatever had emerged from the depths would not return to sleep. The cycle had begun again, and whatever was at the bottom of the waters would come looking for more than just secrets next time. Would you dare to dive into the depths of this mystery? The eternal lake still holds secrets, and perhaps one day it will call out to you. If this story left you thinking, or with your heart racing, leave a comment and tell me what you would do in this situation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more enigmatic stories like this. Your support helps us continue to unravel the unknown.